Hey, what's going on, guys? Alex from Chargers Wire back to do another prospect profile today. Um, Today we're going to dip into the edge rusher class, which is the strongest it's been in a couple years. We are going to talk about someone that's a little bit further down the board, but is a teammate of someone that we've been talking about as a potential Chargers guy in the first round. Before we do that, obviously the promotional stuff to get out of the way. Um, Make sure you are subscribed to the channel, especially because there are going to be one or two more of these videos to come out from me. And then also there's going to be some awesome live stream content that's coming out on the draft during the draft, and so you guys don't want to miss that. So make sure you're subscribed so you get notifications about the live streams going live and all that. I think I'm going to be on for part of it on day two, probably. Still finalizing details and stuff, but if you want to come see me and come hang out and ask me about random third round players, like I will probably be there. So make sure you join up. Also, if you like me specifically, you can follow me on Twitter at Alex Katson, like it's spelled on the screen there, Katson with a K. I write for Chargers Wire, so I'm doing Chargers stuff all year round. I'm also a big draft Twitter guy, which is why I'm out here doing prospect profiles. Very excited for the draft to actually get going so that it can end, so that I can get back to doing normal things like watching the NBA playoffs and TV and going outside and getting a haircut, which, if you can't tell from looking at me, I desperately need to do. So excited for all that stuff. I'll probably take a couple weeks off once the draft actually gets going, but then I'll be back firing away takes on the Chargers and about Washington and about whatever else comes to mind. More and more of my tweets these days are in Japanese as I try to convince the Japanese professional league to let me come write a story about them. But so you can learn Japanese from my tweets. Not really. My Japanese is terrible. But anyway, today we're going to talk about a Clemson as edge rusher. His name is not Miles Murphy because I don't think I've profiled a single player that I've graded higher than the second or third round for these. So we're going to talk about the other Clemson edge rusher, KJ Henry, um, who I think is probably a better fit for the Chargers than Murphy is. And I think is also more likely going to be available around a Chargers pick because I kind of doubt that Miles Murphy is going to get to 21. I feel like we've said that about a lot of Chargers targets in the first round of like, I kind of doubt that they will be there, but one of them is bound to be there. I just don't think that it will be Murphy necessarily. But this video is not about Murphy. This video is about KJ Henry. Um, Henry is a fifth-year senior. He turned 24 in January, on January 27th to be specific. He's 6'4" and a quarter, 251 pounds. Originally came to Clemson as a five-star recruit. He was the number 14 overall player in the country in 2018. Originally from North Carolina, where his dad is from. His dad is a Hall of Famer at Catawba College in North Carolina. He played there before moving on to the Arena Football League. And then once he retired from Arena Football, he got into coaching. And he's been at a million different spots over the last 25, 30-ish years. He's coached at Ohio, he's coached at Wake Forest, at Charlotte, and now primarily has kind of been bouncing around some schools in North Carolina. So Wake Forest, Charlotte, like I said, he was at Western Carolina up until like last week, I think, and now he's the safeties coach at North Carolina A&T. And he's been a defensive position coach pretty much the whole time. KJ has said that his aspiration once he stops playing is to get into coaching or broadcasting, but I think coaching is probably something in his genes because his dad has been one for like 30 years. Henry was also a team captain this year as a fifth-year senior. His leadership has been praised by teammates even before he was named a team captain. So like over the summer last season, people like Miles Murphy were going out of their way to praise what kind of a leader KJ is in that locker room. And obviously, like it being Clemson and such a high-profile program, like those words mean a lot when you're talking about like someone who's really standing out as a leader in those sorts of programs. In 58 career games, Henry had 122 total tackles, 28 for loss, 13 and a half sacks, and 11 pass deflections with two forced fumbles. Not the most productive guy in the whole world. 13 and a half sacks for a career is not fabulous for a guy that played 5 seasons at a school like Clemson. But important thing to remember with Clemson defensive linemen, kind of like Georgia or Alabama or any of these other schools that have 8 million 5 stars playing on the line. Um, it's a lot of rotating in and out. You're not going to be playing 100% of snaps if you're a defensive lineman at one of these schools. And so the numbers are always going to be a little bit underinflated. And you just kind of have to bake that into your analysis. And that's why we watch the tape and don't box score scout. Henry also pulled his hamstring at the combine while he was running the 40. So he missed Clemson's original pro day, but he and Miles Murphy did do a makeup pro day a couple weeks ago where he finished out his testing. Henry just did the agility drills, the 3 cone and the 20-yard shuttle. And so he finished those up, ended up with an RAS of 8.39. He's elite in the speed grade with greens down the board for the 40, the 20-yard split, and the 10-yard split. And then explosion grade, just okay, 31 and a half vertical and a 9'4" broad jump. But still overall a green athlete by RAS, so an above average athlete for certain. Getting into some of the stuff that we noticed on tape. Strengths, first thing that pops out, especially evaluating someone as a Chargers fit, run defense. At the very minimum, KJ Henry is going to show up in the NFL and he's going to set the edge and force ball carriers on outside runs to cut back inside. And at that point, it is no longer KJ Henry's problem. His teammates can either clean those things up or they can't. At Clemson, they could. On the Chargers, TBD. Hopefully, Eric Kendricks fixes that. But at the very, very minimum, he's going to set the edge and force those guys inside. There's also plenty of reps where he gets off those blocks on the exterior and makes that tackle himself. There's a lot of backside pursuit to his game that he does really well, kind of getting around the block and then getting back to the interior and tackling a guy from behind. I would say he is a above average run defender. Compared to the rest of the class. There are definitely some guys who are much, much worse at it. There's a couple guys that are better than him at run defense, but I think that he is solidly middle of the road, very solid player. And that kind of theme is going to continue as we continue to talk about him. Is just like everything is just like, well, he may not be the best in the class at doing it, but he's solid. He's good. He's above average, right? Another strength of his is polish. You don't play 58 games at Clemson if you're not a finished product. um, you can also tell that he's a coach's son just by the way he plays. There are so many like little detail things that he does really well that you just don't see a lot of college players doing. Like his work with his hands is really advanced for being a college player. His footwork is pretty advanced for being a college player. Like he just understands the way that uh, the offensive line is going to move opposite him. He understands the way that his teammates are going to move on the defensive line. He understands angles, pursuit, like all of that sort of stuff that just kind of like falls by the wayside for a lot of college players because they're just the best athlete on the field. Um, I would also say that he's got the most advanced toolbox of the Clemson rushers. So I'm including like Brian Brzee and Miles Murphy and a couple guys that went back to school in that. I think that he is the most willing to switch things up a little bit. I think Murphy has a tendency to kind of get stuck with one or two moves and just throw those kind of the whole game. I think Ben Fennell, who does work with CBS and with the Eagles and stuff, and is a great evaluator on Twitter, put out a tweet about that the other day. How Murphy just has like one or two moves that he just kind of sticks to. Brzee is kind of the same way, where you're just kind of like hoping to beat a guy with power. Murphy, you're just hoping to beat a guy with power. Henry has that to his game, but I think that he also has the largest variety of moves in his toolbox, and he's the most willing to bring out a changeup. And normally, when he does, it's at the right time. So, like, if he sets a guy up rushing uh, as a power rusher, like 2 or 3 plays in a row, then he knows that at that point the tackle is expecting the power rush, and then that's when he'll come in with kind of that like uh, cut to the outside and then like a chop move to get around the corner instead of trying to go through a guy. And it usually catches the tackle off balance. And then vice versa, if he's beating a guy with speed and rushing as a speed rusher over and over and over again for like 2, 3, 4 plays in a row, then he'll come back with the power and kind of knock a guy off balance. So he has a really good sense of just like stacking moves together, not only within the play but also play to play, to kind of make more of an impact on the game as it gets longer and longer. And then also versatility. I think not in the way that versatility is traditionally thought of when it comes to edge rushers of, oh, can he play a 4-3 or a 3-4? Can he drop into coverage as a 3-4 linebacker, like that sort of thing? But more so just that he's lined up, even in the couple games that I watched of him from this season, he's lined up as a stand-up rusher. He's lined up as a 3-point rusher, as a 4-point rusher. So if you're not familiar, 3-point rusher, both your feet and one hand on the in the dirt. 4-point rusher, both hands in the dirt. Um, so kind of more traditional defensive lineman alignments, 3-point and 4-point rusher, but also has experience as a stand-up rusher. Did drop into coverage a couple times, wasn't super great at it. Either like the play just went away from him and it was just kind of like a, disguise to run a blitz basically, or it was just kind of like, okay, maybe let's not keep doing that. He's not twitchy enough to cover linebackers in open space, for example, which is fine because you're not going to ask him to do that. But that versatility in terms of technique lining up to get after the passer should translate really well to multiple fronts, which is what the Chargers really love doing. So you think about like Staley's, like you've got a 4-man front, you've got 5-man fronts, you've got 6-man front sometimes with 4 down linemen, and then also your 2 stand-up rushers on the exterior. You've got 3-man fronts. You've got all kinds of things that Brandon Staley really likes to throw out there. And I think that someone that already has that experience lining up in those different techniques in order to get after the passer is going to fit in that system a little bit better. So that is something that I noticed and marked down as a strength for Henry as it pertains to the Chargers. Weaknesses, most of this stuff is going to be athletic based, which is a little bit rude because, like I said, Henry did test as a roughly 84th percentile athlete, 83 point, 8.39 RAS. RAS is not a direct percentile score just because of the way that the sampling works. It's a whole thing. I've talked to Kent about it at great length at this point. But at this point, the database is large enough that it's effectively a percentile. So an 8.39 is close to an 84th percentile athlete, for better or for worse. Even so, I think that there are some athletic concerns when it comes to Henry and the NFL. The first of those is bend. I think he's an okay bender. He's not like, he doesn't have the loosest hips in the entire world. He gets a little bit stiff trying to get around the corner sometimes, which you can see on the slide. I said elongates his rush arc. And what I mean by that is that if you think about the way that you would dip your shoulder and get around an offensive tackle to kind of curve off the pocket and hit a quarterback either right in the chest or right in the back, depending on what side you're coming from, right? That arc you want to be as tight as possible to like avoid any wasted movement, basically. And so guys that can bend really well are able to get almost perpendicular to the ground and flatten out that arc so that it's basically just like a perfect circle. Like they're just running like a perfect half circle in order to get to the quarterback. Guys that can't bend as well, like Henry, have to take a much wider angle in order to make that move because they can't get all the way under a tackle right away. And so you have to kind of like get halfway under them and then kind of like run under them like you're doing a limbo sort of thing. And like that means that the tackle is able to kind of get their hands on you and push you a little bit off that path. And so you have to elongate that arc a little bit. So it takes longer for you to get to the quarterback. So that's an issue because especially in the NFL, quarterbacks get the ball out much faster than they do in college. And so if you have a guy that's rushing from the exterior like that takes 3.5, 4 seconds to get to the quarterback, like by the time he gets there, the ball's gonna be out. You're not gonna generate any pressure. Also, Henry's explosiveness is not phenomenal. I it was very rare to see him be the first guy off the snap when the ball is snapped, like first guy off the ball. His testing does reflect that. Like I said at the top, a 31.5-inch vertical, a 9'4" broad jump. Both of those are sub 50th percentile scores. The vertical is a 4.87 RAS score, and the broad jump is a 4.46, which are both in the red, but not like super deep into the red. But he's obviously just not like an elite quick twitch ability guy, which again is fine. Not everyone is, but it is something that you kind of have to take into consideration of like he's someone that takes a little bit, like it's not a sports car. It's not 0 to 60 in 1.3 seconds or something. It's 0 to 60 in 2 or 3 seconds, which for some use cases is completely fine. Um, and then also because he's not like a super duper duper freak athlete, I also question how high his ceiling really is as an NFL player. He's already played almost 60 games in college at Clemson, no less. Like this isn't we're not talking about like, oh, he played 60 games, but they were at the FCS level and he was playing against insurance salesmen and real estate agents and stuff. Like this is 60 college games against like future NFL talent. He's a 24-year-old rookie. Um, like what is left for him to improve upon? There are things that he can improve on, of course. Like there's always things that every player can improve on. But like, is there enough developmental wiggle room left for him to actually improve those things? Given his experience and his age and his pedigree um, already coming into the league, right? And because he's not like a top 1% of 1% athlete, like there's not as much room there for you to mold him into someone who all of a sudden is like an elite bender off the edge, right? Like that's just not going to happen. And so you kind of have to factor in like what does this player look like in the NFL? Does it just look like what he looks like in college? And if he just looks like what he looks like in college, then like what is the value of that player? And then also, I put down frame as a weakness. He's not small by any means. 6'4", 251 is pretty decently sized for an edge, especially one that's going to be like a stand-up rusher off the edge. But given his skill set as kind of a guy who's setting the edge first and rushing the passer second a lot of the time, it doesn't necessarily mesh super well with his frame and the way that he's built. He could maybe add a little bit of weight, but I don't think it would be a ton. And so there's not really much upside to like moving him inside on passing downs or anything like that, where like you want him to uh like generate a little bit more run defense or something from like the interior. There's a couple reps on his tape from this season where he ends up going against guards or just like more powerful tackles. Like the Tennessee game is a good example of this, going up against not Darnell Wright actually, but the tackle on the other side. His name is Gerald Mincy. He'll be back at Tennessee next year, but is kind of cut from the same cloth as Wright, just like a super powerful, like more run blocking focused tackle. And I don't think that Henry's power is a bad attribute of his by any means. If I did, it would be on this weaknesses slide. But I don't think it's a good enough attribute of his that you want him like frequently going up against guards. But also, if you're primarily a run stopper and you're not going to get after the passer, then I don't really want you playing all the way to the outside on passing downs either. So it kind of gets into weird territory about like what do you do with him down to down. Um, so that brings us to the summary. I gave Henry a 6.74, which is a high-ish fourth round grade, so a day 3 grade, which is pretty typical of this series, like I said at the top. Trying to get you guys familiar with some players that may not be gone until day 3, so that you can be sitting around on Saturday morning and be like, "Hey, I think I know who that is." um, I think like overall Henry is a solid player. Like, there's nothing glaringly wrong with his game. Everything that's quote unquote wrong are things that are kind of like out of his control and also like are ignorable. Like, you don't have to be an elite bender off the edge in order to be a productive edge rusher. You don't have to be a complete athletic freak in order to make any sort of dent in the NFL. Like you don't have to do all of these things that I listed as weaknesses. I think he's going to end up being a really solid rotational edge for a long time because he's a good run supporter and generally a pretty savvy player. Like he knows the ins and outs of the technique of the position because he's played a ton of games in college and his dad is a coach, and so like he like knows what he's doing. I think he's going to be a great coach once he retires because he already has all of that stuff mastered as like a 24-year-old. But at the same time, like I don't think he's ever going to be a guy that cracks double digit sacks in a season. I don't think that you're drafting KJ Henry to be like a 10, 12 sack a year player. I think you're drafting him to be like a 3, 4, 5 sacks a year player with like great run defense. Um, Now, that said, in terms of Chargers fits, especially in the middle rounds, there's a lot of boxes that KJ Henry checks, which is why he was someone that interested me in terms of doing a video on him like this. He's a team captain, which we've talked about before as being something that the Chargers look at favorably. I think most organizations do, but the Chargers do especially. They love to draft team captains, especially once you get deeper into the draft, because their draft strategy is so culture focused, right? Like they will take a guy off the board for like the smallest character concern that there is, basically, because they just don't want that kind of energy around the building. But team captains, usually there's no problem with those. So they kind of tend to skew that way, especially once the draft gets a little bit later. He was at the Senior Bowl. The Chargers love drafting Senior Bowl players. We've seen maybe a little bit of a skew towards the Shrine Bowl this year, just given like their reported interest in players and stuff. But the Senior Bowl is still going to be a huge part of that evaluation process. Again, especially as you get into the middle and later rounds. He's ready to contribute day one. I know from talking to a lot of you that watch these videos and watch Guilty as Charged in general, there are a lot of you that don't want to take more project players with the third and fourth and fifth round picks because like the Chargers are in a win now window. And so they need to draft players that are ready to play. No more drafting like guys that are 2 years away from contributing, like, you know, JT Woods and Isaiah Spiller and this sort of thing. Like you guys want players that are ready to go like right now. KJ Henry's ready to go right now. You can plug him in right now and he will improve the run defense and get 3 or 4 or 5 sacks as a rookie. Like if you give him enough opportunity to do so, I think that absolutely like he'll do that. He's an above average athlete. Like I said, 8.3 RAS, roughly 84th percentile athlete. Another thing that Tom Telesco has historically favored as we get into the middle and later rounds of the draft, guys that have higher athletic testing scores than the baseline. He's a good run stopper, which the defense needs. You just go on and on and on down the list, and it just makes more and more and more and more sense. I do think that the fourth round is probably the right spot for him ultimately. My grade is not always reflective of where I think a player should be drafted, but I think in this case it pretty much is. I think that if you're the Chargers and you had a compensatory third round pick, that maybe you would think about doing it there. You don't have one of those, and so I think that you're probably waiting to see if he is hanging around in that fourth round pick area, because this edge rusher class is really hard to stack, especially once you get past the first like 5 or 6 guys. It's a lot of guys who are scheme specific, team specific. Like everyone's going to have their different flavors that they prefer, and so it's really really difficult to stack that board once you get down into the weeds like that. So I think that there's a chance that he's available at that fourth round pick. There's also a chance that someone takes a shot on him with that third round compensatory pick area. There's a chance that someone takes him a little bit earlier in the fourth round, but I think like somewhere in there is generally the right range for him. I think that he's going to come in. If he ends up on the Chargers, he'll be an upgraded edge 3 over Chris Rumph. I think that he brings the run support that Rumph is missing. He adds roughly the same value as a pass rusher, given what Rumph has been able to do in the league so far. And he's even a coach's son, just like Rumph is. Rump's dad is a defensive line coach in the NFL. So pretty much like a one-to-one replacement, except with better run defense. So yeah. So I think that overall, good Chargers fit, good player, good solid player. He's going to be a little bit older, which the Chargers tend to kind of avoid, but um, you know, that's the point of these videos, is to get you familiar with some players that they might draft, some players that they might not draft, some players that might just end up somewhere else in the league. So that then, like, when they pop up and it's like, hey, why is this guy going off against the Chargers? You at least like know who they are. Um, but that's going to about do it for today, guys. Again, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel so that you catch all of the stuff leading up to the draft. We're going to have one or two more of these videos coming out over the course of the next few days leading up to the draft. And then also, of course, the draft live stream. I believe Stephen and Tyler have said that they're doing days 1 and 2, so Thursday and Friday. I will probably be on Friday. We still have a couple plans to formalize, like I said at the beginning. But make sure you come hang out. It'll be a good time. We'll have fun. Make sure you're, like I said, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you get that notification about when that goes live. And then if you want to follow me specifically, you can find me on Twitter at Alex Katson, the way it's spelled on the screen over there. And I will catch you guys next time. Later.